Today, I have the great honor to introduce you to Peter Doran. And Peter is Professor of Clinical Trials at the UCD School of Medicine and Director of the UCD Clinical Research Centre, who will speak to us about trials of the future, transforming patient outcomes. You are very welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Patricia. Lovely to be here and to be part of this great series.
Thank you so much. And Peter, I was hoping first to set the scene and that maybe you could share with our audience the pivotal moments in your life, which I suppose enhanced your decision to become a biomedical scientist.
Sure. Thanks, Patricia. I'm delighted to do that. And in fact, we can go back a bit if that's okay. So sometimes I reflect on this when I was younger, much younger, many years ago. My main interest was in maths. And in fact, I think the likelihood of me being a mathematician in my primary and early secondary school days was very high. However, when I was 13, my mum was diagnosed with breast cancer. That was back in 1989. And unfortunately, she died about 6 months later in October. And 2 years after that, my dad was diagnosed with a brain tumor in September 1991. And he died actually just 3 months later in December 91. And one of the things that experience did for me was it's created a sense within myself of wanting to better understand biological phenomenon that couldn't be as easily explained with a set of mathematical equations, but required a different type of approach. So I think that was the start of my interest in developing a career in biomedical science and biomedical research.
So powerful, Peter. Thank you so much for sharing that with the audience. It's so powerful. And I suppose moving on to your roles now, I mean, you play multiple roles across the university and, you're on the board of the HRB as well. But I suppose there's your role of Professor of Clinical Trials in UCD and you're leading out Ireland's largest academic clinical trials program. Maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about what you actually do in these positions.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll summarize, not to use all of our time, but I was thinking about this earlier. So broadly speaking, I guess I wear three hats. I lead the wonderful CRC team that we've built up over the last number of years, a team of almost 50 clinical research professionals, from nurses to data managers, from regulatory to trial operations and laboratory staff. So I have the great pleasure of leading that team who are supporting about 70 investigators at all of our partner hospitals to complete programs of research. I also lead our recently established clinical trials unit. A clinical trials unit is kind of a subset of the activity of the Clinical Research Centre, but it's really focused on supporting investigator-led clinical research. In other words, rather than trials that may emanate from a commercial or industry sponsor, this is about supporting individuals who have clinically meaningful questions to ask, to develop their own trial protocols and ultimately to implement those protocols. And this is a really, really important area because investigator-led research tends to ask the questions that are most clinically relevant to our patients.
Okay, wow. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure our audience will have a lot of questions around that. And I suppose one question I want to ask you before I do open it up to the audience is, from what you've just said, it seems collaboration is a big underlying theme in your work. And maybe you could give the audience just one example for now, one example, and I'm sure we'll get on to others, of a partnership that's made a real difference.
Yeah, so I should say philosophically, but I as an individual, but the centre we've developed is very collaborative. I've always had a really strong sense, perhaps shaped by my own experience, that the complicated problems that we all face in life, whether they're health problems, whether they're climate change problems, or indeed any of the major social problems that society faces today, they're all best tackled by assembling teams of the best complementary minds to work together. I've always fundamentally believed that. So we've put a real focus in the Clinical Research Centre on supporting those collaborations. And that happens at a number of different levels. So for example, the Clinical Research Centre is a vital component of the university's partnership with our partner hospitals, with the Mater Hospital, St. Vincent's, Holles Street, and indeed many others. So that's a central trend. We've also supported and enabled and created a number of clinical trial networks. And one of those, I think, is a really, really elegant example of the power of collaboration and the impact that that can have on patients, but also on us as a university. So I've worked very closely with, for example, Professor Alistair Nicholl, who's a professor of intensive care medicine at UCD for the last number of years, ever since Alistair returned to UCD from Australia. During that time, Alistair and I have worked very closely together, and one collaborative project that we've been involved in and that we've supported through the Clinical Research Centre, I think really demonstrates impact. And that's a clinical trial called REMAP-CAP. And REMAP-CAP is effectively a platform trial in community-acquired pneumonia. REMAP-CAP very quickly became impactful in COVID-19. It was the trial that showed that steroid was very helpful for critically ill patients, as were IL-6 receptor antagonists, but also quickly showed that some other proposed treatments that were being talked about at that time weren't effective. Now, to me, the real power of REMAP-CAP was that it showed that if we put highly motivated, highly skilled people together in a global collaboration, we're able to make real change that impacts patients all throughout the world. And it was a real privilege for me to be able to work so closely with Alistair to make REMAP-CAP here in Ireland such a significant part of our COVID research activity.
It's an incredible story, Peter. So powerful. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I'm sure there'll be many questions. And please don't forget, our audience, to submit your questions via the chat function that you'll see at the bottom of your screens. But I suppose, Peter, before just very quickly, you're, in terms of collaboration, so you're now part of a national clinical trials oversight group. So maybe you might just quickly let our audience know about that.
Yeah, so Ireland is an interesting place in the clinical trial space. We, as you know, we have a really strong life sciences industry. The value of those exports is really significant. We have some of the major tech companies globally are located here in Ireland. So we have an ecosystem that's very conducive to a research agenda. In the context of clinical trials, though, however, despite all of that, and despite having some of the world's leading clinical research organisations here in Ireland, like ICON, we haven't been as successful in the clinical trial space as we would have hoped. There's been problems with barriers to startup of clinical trials and just impediments to really hitting the level of activity that we would like. So recognising this problem, last summer, the Minister for Health established a new National Clinical Trials Oversight Group, a group that's charged with reviewing the landscape for clinical trials in Ireland, identifying those barriers and proposing solutions to make sure that we are creating an environment that supports the most activity that we can. I was delighted to be appointed to that group, and which is actually chaired by Donal Brennan, Professor of Gynecologic Oncology here at the UCD School of Medicine. We've already made some interim reports, and I'm delighted to say that those actions that have been recommended from the group are already receiving attention at government. So we're very optimistic that the work we're doing will create a better national landscape for clinical trials here in Ireland.
Is going to have a real impact on patients and the people of Ireland, which is at the end of the day is what we want. That's amazing, Peter. Thank you. And just some questions coming in around. So here's one for you. How are predictive modeling and wearables changing the way clinical trials are run? And is there any impact on, I suppose, real-time decision making?
Yeah, so this is an area actually that I do some work on myself. So one of the areas that we're really super interested in are clinical trials of rare diseases. And clinical trials in rare diseases are difficult because, well, they're rare. So being able to recruit lots of patients to those trials, having a big N or sample size is technically and logistically really difficult. So one of the areas of exploration is to see, well, could we describe N of 1 trials, or trials where patients effectively become their own control? So an approach that we're using at the moment in the context of lung disease is we're collecting data on patients using wearables. We're collecting data on patients from their own patient-reported outcome measures, and we're using that data to build predictive models of outcome. And then, if we're able to predict reliably what an outcome will be for an individual patient, we can then enroll them in their own trial. We can give them the test intervention, and we can compare their actual outcome to predicted outcome. So this is a really, really important area for clinical trials, because it'll allow us to have better measures of outcome by having stronger predictive value, but also allow us to bring trials to patients and populations that, other than that, can't really access the advantages of clinical trials.
And Peter, in terms of, I suppose that's for rare diseases, but in terms of all clinical trials, then are wearables being implemented in that, and what effect would that have on the actual trials in terms of the question here maybe around, you know, sustainability?
Yeah, so actually, this is a really, really important area, because like most aspects of healthcare, clinical trials have a really significant carbon footprint. And some work that I've done, and indeed some of our collaborators in the UK have done, has been looking at, well, what's the source of the carbon footprint, that high carbon footprint for clinical trials? And unsurprisingly, we find that a significant driver of carbon is travel. And if we think about that for a moment, if we enroll in a clinical trial here at St. Vincent's or the Mater, we may have patients from all over Ireland who are travelling to their visits. And many in the audience will be familiar with the fact in clinical trials, you have multiple visits, much more than you do have in routine care. So let's imagine that we have a clinical trial that has 10 visits. That means the participants have to travel to the centre at least 10 times to be part of the study. Now, by using wearables and by using remote data collection, what we call decentralized trials, we actually have the opportunity to firstly reduce the amount of travel. Secondly, reduce the burden on patients. But thirdly, we're maintaining the integrity of the trial by collecting all of that data anyway. And one of the aspects of that I think is also really important is it starts to democratize access to clinical trials as well, because we're not putting location and ability to travel as a barrier for patients. And I think it's a really, really good example of how technology, how wearables, how remote data collection is allowing us to do better trials, more sustainable trials, and easier to access trials.
Sounds wonderful, reducing bias, everything. It just sounds like it makes so much sense. And Peter, there's a lot of questions coming in, and I just want to ask you one of them live now. I'll try and get through as many as possible. So it was around the rare diseases question, and so I'll read it out to you. Peter mentioned rare diseases and the difficulty it presents for clinical trials. What collaborations are in place with European and other international groups? Thanks.
Yeah, great question, and I'm delighted to say, and the person who asked the question may already know, we actually have a rare disease clinical trial network here at UCD. It's hosted within the clinical research centre, led by my great colleagues Rachel Crowley and Cormac McCarthy. That network is providing access to trials here in Ireland, but also is playing that really useful role of interacting with European colleagues through the European reference networks. And we're very optimistic that that will significantly grow the opportunities for trials in rare diseases here in Ireland.
And increase the amount of data available as well. And lots of questions coming in around data, and I want to get onto that. So can I please get your opinion, Peter, about the role of artificial intelligence in clinical trials, and how can we manage this issue?
Yeah, wow.
Is it an issue?
Well,
I might be biased about that one.
It's a wonderful opportunity across a number of different areas, and I could probably answer that in terms of how we optimize the design of clinical trials, how we recruit patients, how we real-time monitor data, how we real-time monitor adherence, and many, many other aspects. So AI, I think, it's something that we're now starting to better understand the potential for in our clinical trials, and to pick one of those. When we design clinical trials at the moment, we rely on historical data. What do we already know and what happened in other trials? By using by using AI, we have amazing opportunities to generate synthetic data sets that allow us to do simulations of outcomes in clinical trials, and ultimately allow us to optimize the design of a trial, so that before we ever go near a patient, we have tested the likely chance of success of a trial based on the opportunities that that AI presents to us. So a really, really exciting and growing area of investigation.
And I suppose we're unfortunately running out of time, but I'll try and briefly get through these. So that's in relation to data, AI, and so are there any plans to review the restrictive nature of GDPR?
I couldn't comment possibly on GDPR. What I can say is, in the context of Ireland's interpretation of GDPR, I know there is some work ongoing within the Department of Health at the moment to look at how that's working, because there are some requirements that we have in Ireland that aren't the same in other European countries. So how GDPR is applied in the context of the health research regulations is something that that is being looked at, and we expect to see lots more on that over the coming 6 or 9 months.
National clinical trials rather than multi-site recs?
We do have a National Research Ethics Committee at the moment, which is for interventional studies, be they IMP or devices, or indeed in vitro diagnostics. There is now a single or a series of single National Research Ethics Committees where we only have to get that single ethical opinion to allow a trial to proceed here in Ireland. Interestingly, I think there's 6 in NREX, 3 of them are chaired by colleagues from UCD.
So very quickly, if someone wants to get involved, what skills are needed?
A fantastic question, and the answer is all. We've built a team that's complementary, that has everything from data science to statistical experts, from laboratory to nursing and many others. And what we're encouraging investigators and colleagues around the university and the wider community to do is get in touch with us. Tell us your ideas. Let's have a discussion and see how we can work together to turn those ideas into real trials that will ultimately benefit patients.
I think I'll leave it there. That's amazing, Peter. Thank you so much. And just some comments around, your career and your hugely impactful work. So congratulations, lots of congratulations coming in. Well done, Peter. But unfortunately, we are completely over time, and sincere apologies if I did not get your question. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to Peter for a fascinating discussion today. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Lovely to be here, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And do check us out on Spotify and also our website, ucd.ie/discovery/HIT series, where you'll see our upcoming speakers. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Take care, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks a million, Peter. Wonderful.